Welcome to day 47 of our Read Through the Bible in a Year plan. Today, Leviticus 11 through 13. As we look at each of these things, we're going to find a variety of topics and yet a consistent theme of a both and categorization of why things are considered to be clean and unclean, or to make us clean or unclean. There's both a practical and a spiritual or ritualistic component to each one of these things. So chapter 11 deals with foods. We're given a pretty extensive list of various categories of food, starting with things that walk on the ground and what's clean and what's not. And we're given a very limited palette of food options, cows and sheep and goats mostly, along with some other things. Some of the other animals that are considered unclean make you unclean ritualistically, even if you just touch them or you touch their carcasses. Now, part of that is a spiritual uncleanliness or impurity before the Lord. But then there's also a practical aspect of touching dead things tends to open you up to various bacterias and bugs and infections and all sorts of things that are practically dangerous for people, especially at that time with limited medical and cleanliness options. They didn't have any dial soap that they could clean up with. So there's definitely a practical component to it. Some of the foods that are limited or not limited. Pork may be a little more likely to carry foodborne illness than beef, especially in that time. And there's a separation as far as what are common foods among the pagan peoples who worship other gods and the followers of Yahweh. And in everything, the point here is that this would be a people set apart and dedicated wholly to the Lord. And so we'll see that kind of thing throughout chapter 11, that you need to do these things because I am the Lord your God. He says it in verse 45. He says, I am the Lord your God who brought you up out of Egypt to be your God. Therefore, be holy because I am holy. And he continues on saying, these are the regulations concerning animals, birds, every living thing that moves about in the water and every creature that moves along the ground. You must distinguish between the clean and the unclean, between living creatures that may be eaten and those that may not be eaten. And the idea that we're not allowed to touch dead things. There's an impurity and danger there. So again, spiritual and practical implications for all of these things. That makes sense when we get into chapter 12. It's a really short little chapter. It talks about being purified after childbirth. There is a practical and a spiritual aspect to this. The spiritual aspect, when we'll keep seeing throughout these laws, when somebody has some issue of any sort that causes them to discharge bodily fluids, especially blood, but also any sort of skin diseases in chapter 13, anything that oozes or comes off. There's a practical medical infection protocol that is in place here. And there is a ritual aspect of, again, going back to this lifeblood concept and that blood is considered to be within the domain of the Lord exclusively. And so if for any reason there's some sort of bleeding, whether that's from childbirth or from an open sore that is potentially infectious, these things must be dealt with through time of waiting and to allow that to stop or heal up, and then a spiritual aspect of redeeming and reestablishing the holiness of that person, and kind of a signification of, all right, I've met the requirements and now I am once again ritually clean before the Lord. And so that's the purpose of the sacrifices that would declare to the priests and to everybody else that now I have gotten through this and I am back in the spiritual and physical good graces of the Lord. And then, and that kind of relates to the molds and things too, as far as the practical and the spiritual aspect. There's a ritualistic uncleanliness and a practical side of mold and mildew and things like that infecting foods or people and clothing, and all of that is a health hazard. And so there's both a spiritual component and a practical component to all of these things. And in reading through stuff like that, what this speaks to me is that God is not merely a God who is concerned with some spiritual purity and nothing else, but he is holistically in all of creation, especially as it pertains to us and our worship of him. He is concerned with all of it. He is relating to and invested in how we relate to him through all of it, through our physical being, through our mind, our heart, our soul, our purity of thought, and the content of our character, as well as the physical implementation and usage of the world around us and our bodies and our lives and our actions within this world. God is the God of everything that is and has been and will be, now and forever. So that speaks to me of just the greatness and the vastness and the universality of who God is and where his concerns lie as far as his creation goes. And I'm just amazed by that. I'd love to hear what speaks to you and where this is challenging you, what questions you have. As always, comment, respond to these messages in whatever platform you're engaging this with. And let's talk about God's word as we study it together. Thanks for joining us today. Be rad for Jesus.